It's getting interesting out there, everybody. Bitcoin is up 30% this week and back over the $5,000 mark. Elon Musk and the SEC have been asked to play nice by a federal judge. The Fed is getting bullied by everybody, it seems. Mr. Trump included has nominated a couple of gentlemen, one that adheres to the theory that we should be back on the gold standard. He's nominated both of those gentlemen to the Board of Governors. Ray Dalio came out with a very well-written piece on income inequality, very well thought out. We'll get into that, and we'll get into the stock of the week. This is Gerardo Del Real. This is episode 13 of Bizarro World. Those of you that have listened to the podcast in the past may be wondering, where the fuck is the voice of reason and the smart guy, that guy being Nick Hodge? Well, I want everybody to join me in congratulating Mr. Hodge and his beautiful family. And I want everyone to join me in sending good energy and welcome the newest addition to the Hodge family. The family was fortunate and blessed enough this week to give birth to Nicholas Kyle Hodge. Big congratulations to the family. I'm a huge believer in energy, everyone, so please send good vibes their way. Mr. Hodge is off enjoying some very well-deserved time with the baby, wife, and his two beautiful little girls. Well earned. Enjoy. Congrats, Nick. Congrats, family. Back to it. It's interesting out there. On your marks, get set, go. You know what that is? That is the start of a race, RACE, to blow the biggest asset bubbles that ever did get blown. And man, it is coming. The writing is on the wall. President Donald Trump is ramping up his pressure on the Fed. Last Friday, not content with the fact that the Fed has already made a 360, not content with the fact that the Fed has announced that there would be no further rate cuts in 2019, not content with the fact that the Fed has said there's likely only going to be one in 2020, that's not enough. President Donald Trump is now blaming the Federal Reserve for slowing growth in the U.S., and not only is he saying that the Fed should immediately slash interest rates, but he's also saying, let's just get right to it. Let's start injecting money into the economy. Let's get back to QE. I've joked before that QE till infinity is coming. And when I tell you that it's coming, it's coming. Now, that may not happen this year. It may happen early next year. But believe you me when I tell you that the Fed is not going to increase rates in 2020 during an election year. You can not only expect that to not happen, but you should expect a rate cut. It's interesting to me that the same people that didn't see the 2008 crisis coming, Timothy Geithner, Hank Paulson, and Ben Bernanke, have now teamed up to write a threesome of a book about the financial panic of 2008 and how to avoid the next one. The next one will play out differently, folks. The next one will be contagion from overseas. It'll likely be set off by the bond market overseas. I've said this 100 times. It'll lead to a strong dollar. It will lead to gold finally making real-time highs. It'll lead to the U.S. indices continuing their bull market run. And it's all going to come back on the back of cheap money and QE. I mean, I really feel bad for Fed Chairman Jerome Powell because he's put himself in a place that I don't believe he expected to be in. But we are where we are, and that is what it's going to be. Now, it's very interesting to me that on the same week that Mr. Trump is pressuring the Fed to cut rates and pressuring the Fed to go ahead and start with some QE immediately, Ray Dalio came out with a very well-written piece, a very well-thought-out piece on income inequality. And, you know, he went ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and put a link up there, but he argues that the income inequality, one, is unacceptable. And, you know, the outcomes are due to one of two things. It's either evil rich people doing bad things to poor people thing, or it's a lazy poor people and government inefficiencies, as much as they are due to how the capitalist system is now working. So, he, like me, is a capitalist that wants capitalism, which I believe is the system that has brought freedom and opportunity and upward mobility for hundreds of years here in this country. He believes that that's gotten out of hand. He believes that it is no longer an attainable dream for the average American to have the upward mobility that Americans enjoyed, after World War I, after World War II, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. And he brings out some really, really good statistics. He says those in the upper group, when it comes to income, have on average 10 times more wealth than the rest. That's up from 6 times in 1980. And this affects everything. Obviously, it affects the quality of life. Health among the poor is declining overall, and American men that earn less will probably die 10 years earlier than those making the most. Talk about time really being money. He also goes out and makes a pretty dire prediction that if we don't correct the system, the disparities in wealth and values will lead to increasing conflict, including a possible revolution. So, there's a lot of race baiters out there in the world that want to make you believe that if you're brown, you should not like white, and if you're white, you should not like brown, and if you're white, you should not like black, and vice versa. That's not the issue. I'm sorry to tell you that old way of thinking, it's the old people are dying off, and this new generation, for the most part, does not look at it that way. But income inequality is something that hits everybody regardless of color. And so here is his quote. He said, "Disparity in wealth, especially when accompanied by disparity in values, leads to increasing conflict. And in the government, that manifests itself in the form of populism of the left and populism of the right, and often in revolutions of one sort or another." He also goes on to say that, wages for most Americans have been stagnant for decades, and that those who grew up in the middle class increasingly earn less than their parents, and the income gap between the richest and the poorest is as wide as ever. He says this is the equivalent of child abuse. Kids in low-income schools are facing the equivalent of child abuse because of the unacceptable policies that have gotten us here. So I tie this into my opening statement here about asset bubbles. This system really is rigged, everybody. I mean, you can look at it however you want to look at it. I believe it's rigged. So how do we make money for it, right? The capitalist in us, regardless of what you believe, how are we going to make money? I believe that a part of why Bitcoin is up 30% this week, back over 5,000. And it's the same reason that gold has held up very well, despite what I said would happen a couple of weeks ago when the Fed made its pivot. The fact that the dollar is holding up pretty well, and not only holding up, but it's actually moving, headed higher. It's moving higher. And I know that's counterintuitive. A lot of people have been calling for the death of the dollar for seems like decades now. And yes, over time, the dollar will go, the way of all currencies. But in the meantime, you can expect that capital flight from overseas to keep pressuring the dollar upwards. And if gold is going to make a sustained run, I've said it before, you've heard me say it a million times, it's going to have to do so alongside of the dollar. I think we're setting up for that. Bitcoin, it's taken the market by surprise. I mentioned that I'm a big believer in energy that goes, that cuts across a lot of different things. But in the markets, the way that manifests itself is, if you look at Bitcoin, over the past several months, really the volatility that was once commonplace has kind of been sucked out of it. And so there really wasn't much energy there left for another leg down. It's a pretty impressive move. It's a $30 billion addition to the crypto market, right? And so that's it went up by $15 billion in a matter of minutes on Tuesday. So it'll be interesting to see if it holds that $4,700-$4,800 price level. I don't know if we're ready to go back to 7,000 I'm talking strictly Bitcoin, but I can tell you all the other cryptos were up. The crypto stocks were up. You know, Hive went from the 40-cent range to the mid 60s. So interesting times. Definitely interesting times. What else is going on with Mr. Trump? He wants Stephen Moore and Herman Cain on the board of governors. And so, again, this is interesting because Mr. Cain in the past has advocated a return to the gold standard. And Stephen Moore is already calling for a 50 basis point cut immediately. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Mr. Trump has nominated two people that politically and philosophically believe similar things. Obviously, the more influence Mr. Trump can yield in the various branches of government is beneficial to Mr. Trump, right? But let's be clear, everybody. This is the Wizard of Oz. This is the Wizard of Oz. We've seen this. Everyone has seen the movie. Everyone knows how it ends. But the difference this time is everyone is in the dark about how long this version is going to be. That really is the $60 million question, everybody. How long does this last? You know, Japan has shown that they could do this for 30 plus years. Europe, that bubble is bursting as we speak. And I get the feeling that by the end of this year, we're going to have one of these podcasts talking about what a mess that's become and how the dollar caught everybody off guard and how they can't believe that gold is up over 1,400 and the dollar is hitting the 100 level. And so it should be interesting times. One last note on Mr. Dalio, and again, we're going to put a link up to that paper, that piece, because I thought it was so well written. He advocates that the solution lies in better leadership at the top of the country, treating the wealth and income gap as a national emergency, a bipartisan commission to re-engineer the economic system, more accountability, presumably for elected officials, minimum standards for healthcare and education, some redistributive taxes on the wealthy, and more coordination of monetary and fiscal policy to stimulate growth. I couldn't have said it better. It doesn't matter what your politics are. I think everybody should agree that those are some pretty common sense solutions that, you know, us as American citizens, for those of us here in this country, we're going to have to stop voting with party and start voting with ideas. So I'll leave that there. Speaking of asset bubbles, I have three boys. I have a 21-year-old, I have a 16-year-old, and I have a soon-to-be 11-year-old. And, you know, we love music. We love movies. We try to take in a movie together every week. And so the Avenger tickets went on sale. And my wife and I were excited. We love the Avengers franchise. We went to look for tickets. It's the first day. Completely sold out. So I said, okay, well, we can wait, right? These things are sold out for, you know, a month already. And then, again, speaking to the wealth inequality in this country where over half the country can't come up with $400 for an emergency, there are scalpers on eBay that are listing these tickets upwards of $25,000 on the high end. PayPal, here we go with the asset bubbles again. PayPal is offering to help you finance these tickets. It's absolute bonkers what some in this country are able to do and what most in this country can't do. And I'll leave that there. Read Mr. Dalio's piece. Rev those engines. Asset bubbles are coming. You know, the pivot a month or so ago by Mr. Powell was a clear indicator. It wasn't a blink. It was a complete pivot. And we'll see how this ends. Again, I don't know how long this movie lasts, this version of The Wizard of Oz. We know who is behind the curtain there. We just don't know how long we're going to see this play out before it blows up. So that is that. Let's talk Elon Musk. Elon Musk, who I believe is an absolute genius. I love how polarizing he is. I love his products. His cars are amazing. His solar panels are amazing. The platforms that he has been able to monetize in the past, absolutely amazing. Not so amazing is when he gets on Twitter and starts talking shit, right? And not so amazing is when he gets on Twitter and starts doing it to the SEC repeatedly to the detriment of his shareholders. So I am with the crowd that says that he probably should not be CEO. Somebody else should be doing that. And so, you know, he was brought into court to be chastised by the judge. The SEC thought he was in violation of the injunction that was previously placed upon him, which said basically he should shut the fuck up and just sell cars and make amazing things and invent things and help change the world for the better. Mr. Musk, of course, did not. He went to court. The judge basically told the SEC and Elon Musk that they should play nice with each other. They should quit being children and play nice with each other. So it will be very interesting what the next couple of weeks bring. I'll get back to you all on how that is settled. In the meantime, something that broke along with him going to court is there's a tiny little camera in every Tesla vehicle right by the mirror there that isn't active yet. And so somebody asked about the purpose of the camera. And in true Elon Musk form, this is when he uses Twitter for the best, right? Somebody said, somebody tell me what this camera is doing for me or I am shutting it down. He responded by saying that the company is planning to put it to use once it launches its own fleet of autonomous vehicles to compete with the likes of Uber and Lyft, who of course are both developing their own autonomous fleet, right? And so driverless cars, whether we believe it happens in 5 years or 10 years, is obviously something, a technology that's coming to us, whether we're ready for it or not. And so Mr. Musk further elaborated by saying that Tesla owners will be able to allow their car to act as part of an autonomous vehicle fleet, which will make them extra cash, right? And so the camera will be a security measure in case a passenger messes up the car. His words, not mine. And so he also added that the camera was not in use right now and that only the external cameras are being used. But again, you know, this again speaks to Elon's brilliance, right? He is installing hardware on cars today and thinking 5 to 10 years ahead to break into that self-driving ride-sharing vision that he's always had. And so he is far, far ahead when it comes to self-driving technology. And I think, you know, it makes the company a takeout target. I would see somebody like Apple come in, you know, and integrate the platforms and you know, get Elon the hell out of there and just let him invent, right? But whether you like him or not, the guy's brilliant. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Yeah, we'll see where that goes. It's an interesting time. Another interesting time is, and I touched on it a little bit, the difference between those that have and those that don't. We're going to talk a little bit about those that should get the daylights beat out of them. And though this one gets me riled up. So this is the part of the podcast typically where Nick and I go back and forth about things that got us upset and that riled us up a little bit. There's a story that just broke a couple of days ago. There was a 23-year-old man who claimed that he was Timothy Pitson, a missing boy who vanished in 2011 at the age of 6. Now, this boy was kidnapped by his mom, and nobody seen the mom or the boy for several days. And eventually, a couple of days after, his mom was found in a motel room in Rockford, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, and she had passed after an apparent suicide. And so she left a note saying that her son was in safe hands with somebody who loved him, and that, quote, "you will never find him." So this young man, Timothy Pitson, has been missing for 8 years now. And so that would make him, of course, 14. He went missing at the age of 6. So this little prick named Brian Rennie of Medina, Ohio, appears along a street in Newport, Kentucky. And he's begging for help, and he's got a hoodie on. And he's saying that he had been held for years against his will. And he gave descriptions of the kidnappers and details about when he went missing. And so, law enforcement, they responded and they got to it and they said, wow, this may be Timothy. And so they contacted the relatives, and, the relatives obviously are just excited and thrilled and can't wait to see, if their relative is okay. And of course, now we know that DNA tests have revealed that the man wasn't Timothy, but was indeed, this little prick, Mr. Rennie. He's a felon who had been released from prison a month ago after serving 14 months of an 18-month sentence for burglary and vandalism. So, nobody really knows how this guy ended up with details of the crime. He likely read something in the media. He had previously posed as somebody that he wasn't, but this guy is 24, 23 years old, and it's beyond me how law enforcement wasn't able to immediately see that there's no way that this 23-year-old man was 14-year-old Timothy. It's embarrassing that they didn't do a check, before they went ahead and notified the family and said, can you come down and confirm and see if this is indeed little Timothy. So, it's heartbreaking for the family. It's obviously a trying time. It's an embarrassment to the police department. And this guy, should absolutely have the brakes beaten off him when he gets to where he's going. Not cool. Be good people. That's it. This podcast is going to be shorter than most. Nick's not here. It's a week of celebration on that front, and we want to make sure that we give that the time that deserves. I want to talk stocks a little bit. I had started mentioning Bitcoin before I went on my rant about Mr. Rennie here. We've talked about Hydro 66 before, and you should be doing some due diligence on that company. I'm gonna feature it as a stock of the week, and then I want to talk about a stock of the week that we had highlighted in weeks past. But Hydro 66, for those of you not familiar, is a company that has a world-class facility in Sweden. It's actually right across from one of Hive's operations. I can tell you that when I saw the Hive operation from across the street, I wasn't particularly impressed. It didn't look like anybody was there. Not saying it's not a great facility, not saying it wasn't being tended to. I'm just saying, from what I saw, it looked like a broke down warehouse pretty much. So Hydro 66 has significant leverage to crypto upside. So anything above 4,000 makes Hydro a very profitable company. Obviously, the higher that crypto prices go, the better. But Hydro isn't just a crypto play. They are on the front line of cloud strategy, information security. The safety is world class. The facility is absolutely world class. Lowest cost in the business, sustainable hosting at a massive scale. And they truly are the creme de la creme when it comes to this space. So I would encourage everybody to look into Hydro 66, ticker symbol SIX on the Venture Exchange. I'll leave that for you to dig into. That's going to be my stock of the week. However, before I let you go, I want to talk about a couple of more things. The first one, Azucar Minerals. I got on a rant about a week ago, I think it was last week's episode, talking about how much it bothered me when companies that are doing things the right way catch criticism from people that don't really understand or haven't taken the time or frankly haven't wanted to understand what the company is doing and why it's doing it that way. So I had mentioned a week ago, there was a blogger out there, a couple of bloggers, and they criticized Azucar Minerals run by Mr. Morgan Poliquin for drilling in the same area over and over, not doing discovery drilling. You know, it was clear if you read a press release that they were drilling different areas and that they were drilling for new targets and looking for new things. as well as increasing the resource at the one zone that they had already drilled out pretty extensively, the Norte zone, which still has extensions. So I thought it was hilarious that just right after that, Azucar comes back and not only discovers a new zone, the Suegro zone, which of course is kilometers away from where they were accused of drilling repeatedly, but they also discovered a hypogene porphyry zone at Villarica, again another target in this 5-kilometer trend that they have right now, and they hit some pretty good numbers. It was 168 meters of 0.56 grams per ton gold and 0.29% copper. Within that, there were 27.95 meters of 1.53 grams per ton gold and 0.43% copper, and 12 meters of 2 grams per ton gold and 0.58% copper from surface. So you now have high grade. You now have from surface high grade, and obviously the results from what's called the Raya Tembrillo area are I think they're a game changer for the company, and I think that there's a reason why the company is immediately following up the hole that hit that mineralization with another one. The Raya Tembrillo target on the outskirts of Villarica is hole 69. Hole 70 is in progress as we speak. Obviously, you want to drill holes nearby. You want to get the orientation down. You want to figure out what the mineral package is. I was lucky enough to be able to interview Morgan. I will put a link up speaking to his approach and why they're excited and what the rest of the year holds. And so hopefully that is a stock that once traded, by the way, at about the $1.40 range Canadian. It's currently trading about 37 cents Canadian. Hopefully that's a stock that turns it around. They have a deep-pocketed partner, Newcrest, which is in at 135 Canadian. So your stock of the week this week is Azucar Minerals, ticker symbol AMZ on the Toronto Venture Exchange. You also have ticker symbol AXDDF over the counter here in the US. So that is that for stocks. Let's get on to getting on out of here so you can enjoy the rest of your day. Before we do that, two things. You guys know I'm a huge music lover. My wife and I both big music geeks, all genres. Love the live music scene. Try to get out to as many shows as possible. So two notable events this week. It's the 25-year anniversary of Kurt Cobain's passing, and that's something that I think anybody that grew up in the 90s probably remembers. You know, Kurt Cobain was really a game changer for his genre and was somebody that obviously was struggling with addiction, something that obviously was a precursor to the massive opioid crisis that we've seen in this country, thanks to, in large part, you know, asshole pharmaceutical companies that peddle this stuff to everybody. That's another rant for another time, and I've actually ranted about that in the past, so I won't get too much into it. So that was one notable event. And, you know, the other one was the passing, the murder of businessman, philanthropist, artist, and community activist Nipsey Hussle, as he was known, who was murdered in Los Angeles. This is one that, you know, kind of hits home to me. Nipsey comes from a neighborhood, the 60s as they're known, in South Central Los Angeles, where it's low income. Gang culture is just a part of politics. The mayor will tell you that. The politicians will tell you that. The police department will tell you that. And so, you know, this gentleman had grown up in the Crenshaw area of South Central Los Angeles and was able, you know, to turn his life around and use his platform to go back to his community. He used his success to get back to the community, and he started buying real estate. He started developing it. He was known to do just amazing things in the neighborhood. I'll give you an example. My brother, he's a journalist for the New York Times, actually went to the neighborhood there. He did a story on him. I'll put a link up. But he was speaking to somebody that was just distraught, and so he asked if he could interview her, and she said absolutely. And so he asked what her thoughts were, And she said, Nipsey was everything to us. I came to his store, his Marathon store, which Nipsey was often at, which employed, by the way, a lot of ex-felons to make sure that, people that are transitioning back to society, trying to be productive members, had an opportunity to do so. And so she went into the store one day and said, my cousin was murdered and we're just trying to raise money to help with the funeral. And so she said that Nipsey Hussle said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of all of it. Just, I don't want the press to find out about it, And so that was an example of the commitment that this gentleman had to his neighborhood. A brilliant young man. He was helping bridge the gap between, low income representation with technology companies. And so he started a campaign called Vector 90, where he was providing, something like 5,000 square feet of space to teach these kids and give them access to technology and to create a pipeline. He was working with the city and he was working with the state to create a pipeline of internships and education so that, in his words, he didn't want these kids to just look at rappers and singers and artists and think that that is the only way out. He wanted to make sure that they understood that you could be, a marketing professional, a technology professional. In his words, he wanted people in the neighborhood to look up to people like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. And he said that, being influential as an artist and young and coming from the inner city, he wants to be one of those people that helps move that line of thinking forward. So tragic situation. Mr. Hussle was murdered by somebody he was familiar with, somebody he grew up with, somebody that was from the same neighborhood. And it's, it's a heartbreaking story because, again, this is somebody that just kept going back to his neighborhood despite the fact that he was a multimillionaire, owned all his own masters, distributed his own music, and his life was cut short because of an envious, jealous, horrible person that now will likely face, not just life in prison, but probably death in prison. Because if anybody knows LA politics, you understand that this gentleman is not going to be, the gentleman that killed Mr. Hussle is not going to likely last very long in the prison system. He has been arrested and charged. So rest in peace to Mr. Hussle. Rest in peace to Mr. Kurt Cobain. Back to the market, guys. Stock of the week, Azucar Minerals. I encourage you to do due diligence on Hydro 66. I believe there's some good upside there. I think it's a good speculation. They have revenue that is completely independent of cryptocurrency. But man, if this crypto asset bubble continues higher, that company can get very profitable very quick. 70% of the stock is owned by long-term shareholders. Very little on the float, so be careful with that. That's all for episode 13 of Bizarro World. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Mr. Hodge and family, congratulations. Nicholas Kyle Hodge, welcome to this Bizarro World. Episode 13, Bizarro World. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.